The Nazgûl were Sauron's most feared servants. Entire armies fled at their approach. Cities trembled when they appeared. So, when the Ringwraiths finally reach the Shire searching for the One Ring, an obvious question emerges. Why didn't they simply attack openly? Why sneak through villages asking questions? Why rely on threats, spies, and secrecy when they could have ridden straight into Hobbiton and searched every hole themselves? After all, Sauron knew the ring had been found. He knew it was somewhere in the Shire, and he had sent the Nazgûl to recover it at any cost. So, what stopped them? The answer reveals a hidden weakness in Sauron's strategy, and a mistake that could have cost him the war before it had even begun. Welcome back to Middle-earth Explained. Let's get started.
The Nine have left Minas Morgul.
The Nine?
They crossed the River Isen on Midsummer's Eve, disguised as riders in black.
The first thing we need to understand is that Sauron knew far less than many fans assume. By the summer of the year 3018 of the Third Age, Sauron had finally learned two crucial pieces of information. Through the capture and torture of Gollum, he discovered the words Shire and Baggins. Those two clues were enormously valuable, but they were also frustratingly incomplete. Sauron did not know where the Shire was. He did not know who Baggins was, and most importantly, he did not know who actually possessed the ring.
Baggins is around here. They're up in Hobbiton. That way.
This is often overlooked because readers already know the answer. We know that Frodo lives in Bag End. We know exactly where the ring is. But from Sauron's perspective, the situation was far murkier. The Shire was a remote land that attracted little attention from the great powers of Middle-earth. It lay far from Mordor, hidden behind centuries of obscurity. Even many men outside Eriador knew little about it. Before the Nazgûl could retrieve the ring, they first had to locate the Shire itself. This immediately created a problem. If the Ringwraiths launched a violent attack the moment they arrived, they would risk alerting everyone before they even knew where to look. The ring could easily be hidden, moved, or carried away while they were still searching. Instead, secrecy became their greatest weapon.
They are the Nazgûl, Ringwraiths, neither living nor dead. At all times they feel the presence of the ring.
The Nazgûl crossed Middle-earth disguised as black-cloaked riders, gathering information piece by piece. They questioned travelers. They intimidated locals. They followed rumors and trails. Their mission was not to conquer the Shire. It was to find a single object hidden somewhere within it. And at this stage, they were essentially hunting in the dark. That is why the Ringwraiths did not arrive like an invading army. They arrived like hunters tracking elusive prey. Before they could seize the ring, they first had to discover exactly where it was, and that uncertainty shaped every decision they made. But even after the Nazgûl finally found the Shire, another problem remained. Recovering the ring was not simply a matter of force. In fact, an open attack could have triggered exactly the kind of response Sauron was desperately trying to avoid.
They've reached the Shire. They will find the ring. And kill the one who carries it.
Even after the Nazgûl finally located the Shire, openly attacking it would have created a dangerous problem for Sauron. At this point in the story, Sauron was not yet ready for open war. His power was growing rapidly, but one of his greatest advantages was that many of his enemies still did not fully understand what he was planning. The wise, including Gandalf and Elrond, knew darkness was rising, but they did not yet know exactly how much Sauron had learned about the ring. An open assault on the Shire would have changed that instantly.
Gandalf, the enemy is moving. Sauron's forces are massing in the east. His eye is fixed on Rivendell.
Imagine 9 Ringwraiths riding through Hobbiton, burning homes and slaughtering hobbits in search of something. News of such an attack would spread across Eriador like wildfire. The Rangers of the North would be alerted. Gandalf would know immediately that Sauron was searching for the ring. Rivendell would be put on high alert. Suddenly, every one of Sauron's enemies would understand that the Dark Lord was closer to recovering the ring than anyone had feared. That was a risk Sauron could not afford. The Nazgûl were sent to recover the ring quietly and quickly, before the Free Peoples had time to react. Every day that Sauron's enemies remained uncertain was an advantage, but secrecy was only part of the equation. there was another reason the ringwraiths avoided open violence in the Shire, and it had everything to do with the ring itself.
That Black Rider was looking for something. Or someone. Frodo?
The Nazgûl were not sent to destroy the Shire. They were sent to recover the One Ring. And those are two very different objectives. If the ringwraiths had ridden openly into the Shire, terror and chaos would have followed immediately. Hobbits would flee in every direction. Roads would become crowded with travelers trying to escape. Messages would spread from village to village. In the confusion, the ring could disappear before the Nazgûl ever got their hands on it. This was exactly the kind of outcome Sauron wanted to avoid. Remember, the Nazgûl did not know that Frodo was still calmly living at Bag End. They only knew that a Baggins somewhere in the Shire possessed the ring. If they announced their presence too early, they might turn a difficult search into an impossible one. In many ways, the ringwraiths were operating like bounty hunters following a lead. Their goal was to close in on the target before the target realized it was being hunted. The longer they remained unnoticed, the better their chances of finding the ring before anyone could move it. Ironically, an open attack might have accomplished the exact opposite of what Sauron wanted. Instead of securing the ring, it could have sent it far beyond the Nazgûl's reach. And there was another complication. Despite their terrifying reputation, the ringwraiths were not nearly as unstoppable as they appeared. In fact, operating so far from Mordor exposed some very real limitations. If you enjoyed the video so far, don't forget to drop a like.
If you want him, come and claim him.
When most people think of the Nazgûl, they picture the terrifying figures from the films. Unstoppable servants of darkness who can sweep aside almost any opposition. But Tolkien's books paint a more nuanced picture. The ringwraiths were indeed among Sauron's most feared servants, yet their greatest weapon was psychological. They spread terror, despair, and fear wherever they went. Against isolated travelers or unprepared communities, that was often enough. But the Shire was not sitting completely unprotected. Unknown to most hobbits, the northern lands were watched over by the Rangers, led by Aragorn. For generations, these Rangers had quietly defended the borders of the Shire from threats that ordinary hobbits never even knew existed. In fact, once the Nazgûl entered the region, Aragorn himself became one of their most dangerous opponents, repeatedly frustrating their efforts to track Frodo.
He's one of them Rangers. Dangerous folk they are along in the wilds. What his right name is, I've never heard, but round here, he's known as Strider.
More importantly, the ringwraiths were operating deep inside enemy territory. They were hundreds of miles from Mordor, without armies to support them, and with only limited information about their target. If they drew too much attention to themselves, they risked attracting exactly the people Sauron wanted to avoid: Gandalf, Aragorn, Elrond, and the other leaders of the Free Peoples. This is something the Nazgûl understood well. Their mission was not to win battles. Their mission was to capture the ring and return it to Sauron, and that required patience more than brute force. Yet, perhaps the strongest evidence comes from what the Nazgûl actually did when they finally discovered where the ring-bearer was hiding. Their actions reveal exactly how they preferred to operate, and why secrecy remained their greatest advantage. The clearest proof comes from the moment the Nazgûl finally believed they had cornered their prey. After gathering enough information, the ringwraiths learned that Frodo Baggins had supposedly moved to a house in Crickhollow, on the eastern edge of the Shire. At last, they had a specific location. At last, they thought they knew where the ring was, and only then did they strike openly. In the middle of the night, several Nazgûl surrounded the house and broke in, convinced that Frodo was inside. But by then, Frodo had already left. The ring-bearer was miles away, heading toward Bree.
Must I do?
You must leave, and leave quickly.
Where? Where do I go?
Get out of the Shire. Make for the village of Bree.
This moment is incredibly revealing. Notice that the Nazgûl did not begin their mission with a violent assault. They spent weeks gathering information, tracking movements, and narrowing down the ring's location. Force was used only when they believed the search was over, and the ring was finally within reach. Unfortunately for them, they were too late. Their attack on Crickhollow demonstrates exactly how Sauron intended the mission to work. First identify the target, then move swiftly to seize the ring before it could escape. The problem was that every delay gave Frodo more time, and in the end, that may have been the greatest irony of all. The Nazgûl's need for secrecy was completely logical, but it also cost them the one thing they could never recover: time.
If you want him, come and claim him.
When you put all the pieces together, the answer becomes surprisingly clear. The Nazgûl did not avoid attacking the Shire because they lacked the power to do so. They avoided it because an open attack would have undermined the entire mission. Sauron possessed only fragments of information. The Ringwraiths were searching for a land they barely knew, a person they had never seen, and an object that could disappear at any moment. Under those circumstances, secrecy was far more valuable than brute force. Had the Nazgûl ridden openly through the Shire, every advantage they possessed would have vanished. The hobbits would panic, the rangers would intervene. Gandalf and the Wise would immediately realize that Sauron was closing in on the ring. What began as a covert hunt would suddenly become a race against an alerted enemy, and that is the great irony of the entire mission. The Nazgûl were among the most terrifying beings in Middle-earth, yet their success depended on remaining unseen for as long as possible. The moment they revealed themselves too openly, the ring became harder, not easier, to obtain. In many ways, the Shire was the worst possible place for the ring to be hidden. Not because it was heavily defended, but because it was so obscure that Sauron was forced to search for it in the dark. So, while many fans imagine the Nazgûl simply sweeping through the Shire and taking the ring by force, Tolkien's story reveals a much more complicated reality. One where patience, secrecy, and timing mattered far more than raw power. In the end, the Nazgûl could not simply attack the Shire openly because their mission was never to conquer. It was to find the ring before anyone realized what Sauron knew. An open assault would have spread panic, alerted the Wise, and likely pushed the ring even farther from their grasp. Ironically, the most feared servants of Mordor failed for the very reason they seemed unstoppable. Fear works best when it arrives too late.
And 9 rings were gifted to the race of men, who above all else desire power.
If you like this kind of video, join the channel and leave a like for more content like this. It really helps me out. Thanks for watching, and as always, see you on the next one.